Ready? Good morning, folks. It's time for us to begin our class. This quarter is being live streamed, so welcome everybody who's watching online. I appreciate y'all joining us this morning. We're looking at this quarter, the next 2 or 3 months, the major stories in Joshua and Judges, and we may get to the Judges. I'm not real positive about that. The more I look at Joshua, the less I think about getting into the book of Judges. We'll try to get some of it covered. So this morning, we want to begin by looking at the man Joshua. And since we're studying the book of Joshua and never start where we're supposed to, we're going to start in Numbers 13. In Numbers chapter 13, Moses is called by God to select 12 men to go into the land of Canaan to spy out the land. They have made the wilderness wandering. They've gone through all of that. And they're standing on the east side of the Jordan at Mount Nebo, camped at Beth Peor, Pisgah, however you want to call it. And they're anticipating going in, I back up, wrong one time. They come from the law, getting the law at Mount Sinai, got to Kadesh to the south. There we go. Wrong page there. But anyway, they're at the south, and God says, Moses, select 12 men, one from each tribe. And in verse 8, from the tribe of Ephraim, he selected Hoshea, the son of Nun. Now, when you first read that, you're thinking, well, that's not his name, because we've always known him as Joshua, the son of Nun. However, verse 16, these are the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, but Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua, or perhaps more accurately, Yehoshua. Now, that's what it looks like in the Hebrew, and that little stretch there to the other end of that is Yehoshua in Hebrew. And just for fun, Hebrew reads from right to left, so if you try to start from this end going that way, it's the wrong way. You got to turn around. But it means the Lord is salvation. And Yehoshua is also spelled Yoshua. It's also spelled Hoshea. It all means the same thing. And so there's some variant spellings to that word, but it basically means the Lord is salvation, or salvation is from the Lord. So Joshua, the son of Nun, name changed by Moses, but there's a background to that we just kind of miss out. According to 1 Chronicles 7, Joshua is the 10th generation from Ephraim, and his grandfather is one of the princes of Israel. There were selected a head man, a leader, a prince, so to speak, of each tribe. And Joshua's grandfather was that prince, or that leader, or that chosen one, who later became one of the elders of the tribes. So when Moses called for the elders of the tribes, Joshua's grandfather was one of those guys, and perhaps Joshua was involved in that at some point in time, and we're not real sure about that. We first read of Joshua in Exodus chapter 17, verses 8 through 10. What happens in Exodus 17, Israel has crossed the Red Sea. They had their celebration in chapter 15. They're free of Egypt, and they're heading toward Mount Sinai to get the law. The tribe of Amalek, and the Amalekites are descended from Esau. Amalek was the son of Esau, and he separated himself and became his own tribe. They generally stayed just south of what later we understand as the country or the allotment of the land to Judah, the Negev, the area between what we think of as the south part of Canaan and the beginning of the Sinai Peninsula. That's where the Amalekites normally stayed. David fought them on several occasions. Saul was supposed to fight them and destroy them, but he didn't, so that's later on. But they sneak around behind Israel as they're marching away from the Red Sea, and they attack the back end of this mass of people that's moving. The stragglers, it's sometimes called. So in retaliation, Moses selects Joshua to take the army, what we may consider as an army. Let's back up just a little bit. When Israel was in Egypt, we understand they were slaves. There's no basic organization. No one was basically in charge. They just kind of existed. There may have been some hierarchy of I'm the leader of the family or I'm the leader of the tribe, but that doesn't seem to be evident until later on. So they are a group of disorganized, unorganized group, massive people moving to Mount Sinai. When they get to Mount Sinai and they get the law and they build the tabernacle, then they're organized. And around the tabernacle, God says, I want them to camp in this way. And when you march in this way. The ark goes first, then the camp of Judah. And then all the way they went. And when you stop, we plant the ark, we build the tabernacle, and we settle down around it. So there's a lot of organization there. They were organized into the tribes and separated out so that this is where this tribe camps, this is where this tribe camps, and so forth. So there was an individuality among the tribes given, as well as a great deal of organization and formalization of how they would operate and move. But until that point, they got the stragglers in the back just kind of hanging on. Maybe they're dragging their feet, and Amalek attacks them. So Moses says, Joshua, select your army and go out and fight them. And I'm going to go up on top of this hill with Aaron and Hur. And who Hur is always a question. He seems to be kinfolk of Moses and Aaron. Exactly how close, we're not positive. It's read a number of different ways. Uncle, aunt, cousin, nephew, we're not real sure how he fits in there, but he falls in that group. He's one of the Levites. But we know the story. Moses holds up his staff. As long as he holds his staff up, Israel wins. Now, when his arm gets tired, he puts his staff down, and Israel begins to lose. So finally, he sits down to the rock, and Aaron and Hur stand on either side, and they hold his staff up, and Moses is holding on to it. Now, that would have been a nice picture to have watched and seen how that worked. But Joshua was first introduced there as the leader of the army of Israel. Now, at that point, he becomes a public figure. Up until that point, he is not mentioned or known about at all. In chapter 24, when God says, Moses, I want you to come up to the mountain, I'll give the law. Now, what we miss here, and I try to emphasize this because we just don't think about it enough, in Exodus chapter 20, Moses is at the foot of Mount Sinai, and so is all of Israel. They're gathered at the foot of Mount Sinai, and there's thunderings and lightnings and smoke on top of the mountain, and the place is shaking and earthquakes. And God said, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Moses was at the foot of the mountain. Israel was at the foot of the mountain. They heard the voice of God speak. They heard him say the 10 Commandments the first time. When that was over, they said, Moses, you go talk to God, come back and tell us what he said. We don't want to hear his voice again. And God said to Moses, they got a good idea. You come talk to me. And so in Exodus 24, Moses and Aaron and Hur and Joshua, they go up the mountain, as well as the 70 elders. At this point, they organized that group of men, of leaders. And they see God's presence. The elders, Aaron and Hur, go down the hill. Moses and Joshua stay up. And Joshua is called there Moses' minister. Now, I don't know what Joshua's job was. Was he the one who fetched water, cooked breakfast, gave him a sandwich for lunch? Did he stand there with the staff, keep anybody from coming too close? We don't know, but he served Moses on that occasion. Now get this picture. Here's an unknown individual when it crossed the Red Sea. He leads Israel's army against Amalek. And now he's on the mountain with Moses, hearing God speak, watching God write the 10 Commandments, the tablets, the law on the tablets of stone. So at this point already, Joshua is being prepared by God to lead Israel. Now, it wasn't God's plan at that point that Moses go into the land. It's later on that Moses messes up and he's forbidden to enter. So Joshua is a servant or a minister to Moses on the mount for that 40-day period while Moses is getting the law, the plans for the tabernacle, and all that kind of good stuff. Chapter 32 of Exodus, in verse 17. Joshua's on the mountain with Moses. And God said, Moses, there's a problem in the camp. They have left me and have built an idol. And so Moses and Joshua are coming down the hill, and Joshua says he hears the noise in the camp. He said, "That's the sound of war." And Moses said, "No, that ain't war. They're partying. They're dancing and singing. They're having a big time down there, and they shouldn't be. They're worshiping the golden calf." So Joshua, coming down the mountain, says, "You know, that sounds like war, and I'm up here. I need to be down there leading the people." But Moses straightens him out. So Joshua was not involved in the golden calf incident, but he was involved with Moses in eradicating that issue. Chapter 33 of Exodus. We'll come back to Numbers 13 here in a minute probably. But Exodus 33, Moses, after he comes down from the mountain, after the golden calf incident, he goes back up, gets another set of tablets. But when he comes down the mountain, he builds a tent of meeting, or sets up a tent of meeting. Now, you got the tabernacle built up in the middle of the camp. But until that's set up and Israel is camped around it, Moses sets up a tent outside of the camp, away from everybody else, where he will go and meet with God. And Joshua, in Exodus 33, he goes with Moses out there. Verse 33, or chapter 33, verse 11, back up to verse 9. Whenever Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. When all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would arise and worship, each at the entrance of his tent. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, just as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses returned to the camp, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. Now picture that. Moses and Joshua go out to the tent. Moses talks with God. The pillar of cloud leaves or raises. Moses goes back to the camp, but Joshua stays out in this special tent where he has been and will continue to be in the presence of God. Now look how he's being prepared to take Moses' place as time goes on. In chapter 11 of Numbers, back to Numbers, and verse 28, he's called the attendant or minister or servant. That word has a number of different meanings that's used there of Moses from his youth. So Joshua had been with Moses. Now, question. Moses, 80 years old, talks to God at the burning bush. 40 years old. Talks to God at the burning bush. Moses goes to Egypt and says, all right, God said y'all come out, here's the 10 plagues, and here we go. At some point in that time frame, Joshua attaches himself to Moses as his minister, as his servant, as his attendant. And maybe that's why when Amalek attacks later on, that Moses turns to his servant, his minister, you go and lead the army against Amalek. I don't think he just stood up and said, you know what, we need somebody, you'll do, and grabbed Joshua. I think it was a process that was going on that selected Joshua to be that person. And at some point in that early period, when Moses returned to lead Israel out, Joshua was assigned, adopted, appointed, became, however you want to call that, the servant or the minister or attendant of Moses. It says from his youth. So if Moses was 40 when he leads Israel out, he is 80. Well, I'll get it right in a minute. No, he was 80 when he led Israel out. They wandered for 40 years, and he dies at age 120. Thank you, Dave, for keeping me straight. Thank you. I got his nod over there. All right, so that's another, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused on that this morning. I apologize. Chapter 13, back to here. He's selected as one of the 12 spies. Now here we know the story pretty well, because Joshua from the tribe of Ephraim, Caleb from the tribe of Judah, and these other guys whose names we do not remember. You ever thought about that? Name the 10 spies as other than Joshua and Caleb. 1, we don't remember. 2, we probably can't pronounce them. I find it interesting. The names that we need to know are the ones that are easy to pronounce. The ones we don't need to worry about, you can't pronounce them anyway, so don't worry about it. Shaphath, Egal, Paltai, Gadiel, Gadad, Amiel, Sethur, Nabai, and Guel. Yeah. I'll stick with Joshua and Caleb. I can handle those. So we'll stay with those. So Joshua from Ephraim, Caleb from the tribe of Judah, they go out and they spy out the land. They spend 40 days walking around the countryside. Now, did they go in pairs? Did it separate individually? We really don't know. But they went out and they went throughout the land and they brought back some souvenirs. They brought back some of the produce of the land. In fact, 2 of the guys brought back a cluster of grapes hanging on a rod in between them. So look how big this cluster of grapes is. This is truly a land flowing with milk and honey. Just for fun of it, just for sake of information, the symbol for the ministry of tourism in Israel is the 2 spies carrying the cluster of grapes on a rod between them. So they were the original tourists of the land. So he selected one of the 12 spies. But when they come back, the 10 that we just named are saying, it's a great land, just like God promised, it's full of milk and honey. But the Anakim live there. Now, when you read it, you say, okay, so what? The Anakim, the Emims, the Rephaims, the Zuzims are all giants. One of them, later on we'll read, had a bed about 12 feet long. Goliath is descended from them. He was 9'9". We are like grasshoppers in their sight. So we take Bud Rogers or Gordon Ward standing up here and get one of these first graders standing beside him and look at the difference in height. That's how Israel, these 10 spies, felt looking at the Anakims. What they did not see, what they in unbelief failed to recognize, was the God who brought them out of Egypt with 10 plagues and opened the Red Sea for them to cross, was the God that was going to lead them into the land of Canaan. The God they heard speak from the top of Mount Sinai was the God that was going to lead them into the land of Canaan. The God who brought them thus far was going to continue to lead, but they refused to see that. They looked at their height instead of their God. Quite often, we do the very same thing. So on this occasion, when they began to say, we can't do it, Joshua in chapter 14 stands up with Caleb, and my wording here is kind of weird, I'm sorry. He, with Caleb, pleaded for Israel to go ahead and move into the land of Canaan. He was saying with Caleb, we can't do it. But they refused. The people listened to the majority instead of in faith listened to Moses, Joshua, and Caleb. And so God said, because of your unbelief, you're going to wander 40 years. 1 year for each day the spies were in the land. Technically, it was 38 years. Okay, just to be rounded off a little bit. So from there, they move around. And when we think wander, and that's the word used here, they were not lost. They knew where they were and where they were going. Now, no, they didn't have a map. They didn't have a world atlas. But they had to move around. They were basically a nomadic group for a period of time. And part of that is, you have to understand, when they left Egypt, they had a large number of flocks and herds. And these animals have to be moved in order to have pasture. And so they constantly moved with the animals. And I'm not sure, but that a number of the animals were actually herded throughout the land of Canaan as far as perhaps the Euphrates River and back to find forage. Since we are not an agricultural society anymore, many of us don't understand that a certain acreage of land cannot support or can only support a certain number of animals. Sheep actually bite the grass off at the ground. Now, a cow and a horse, they tear it, so it's got plenty of leaf left to grow, but sheep will bite it off close. And unless they're moved around, the grass will not recover. take your lawnmower, drop the wheels down as high as they'll go, drop the blade down as low as it'll go, and scalp the ground. How long will it take it to regrow? Now, you raise the blade, and it will grow a lot better because there's enough blade left to reproduce itself and to grow. So that's the idea. They had to continue to move these herds. And they had a lot of animals because it takes that much to support that crowd. They were very wealthy in animals. Go back and you study Abraham and Lot. The herdsmen were arguing over who got to the land first to pasture the animals. And Abraham says, Lot, you go one way, I'll go the other. So Lot chose the Jordan, the lush valley of the Jordan, and Abraham went the other direction. Their herds were moved up and down on opposite sides of the Jordan River for forage and for pasture. But they weren't the only people in the country. The people who already lived there, they had flocks and herds too. So it was kind of like we think of as open range. And the animals were constantly in motion, moving around from pasture to pasture. Go back and study very carefully Psalm 23. You prepare a table before me. You lead me in green pastures. Because today's pasture, a flock of sheep can destroy in just a little bit of time. So they have to be constantly moved. So you get all this going on. So he pled with Caleb, along with Caleb, for Israel to go ahead and move into the land of Canaan and take possession as God had promised. But God said, nope, y'all aren't going. Instead, only 2 people of that crowd. So Numbers 26, verse 65, the Lord had said of them, they shall surely die in the wilderness. And not a man was left of them except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. After this time period of 40 years of wandering and moving around, they come back to the land of Canaan. Instead of coming up to the south at Kadesh, where they came the first time, and sent out the 12 spies, they come around to the east side, the other side of Edom, and the land of Ammon and Moab, at Mount Pisgah, Mount Nebo. They camped at Beth Peor, the house of 7 springs. And from there, they're going to cross the Jordan and go to Jericho and so forth. And we'll get into that later on. But God promised that only Caleb and Joshua, of all that massive multitude of people who left Egypt with Moses, only 2 that were aged 20 and above lived to go into the promised land. Because of their unbelief, all of those of age 20 and below, they were allowed to go in. But those aged 20 and above all died in the wilderness because of their unbelief. Chapter 32, verses 11 and 12, still of Numbers. None of them who came up from Egypt, from 20 years old and upward, shall see the land which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, for they did not follow me fully, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, the son of Nun, for they have followed the Lord fully. Notice the contrast there. Those who did not follow the Lord fully, they don't go. But these 2 did. So God promised specifically that these guys would go. Now, back up a few chapters, Numbers 27. We'll get to the book of Joshua in a little bit. Don't despair. Verses 15 and following. Moses spoke to the Lord. May the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation who will go out and come in before them, who will lead them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of the Lord will not be like sheep which have no shepherd. So the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation, and commission him in their sight. You shall put some of your authority on him, in order that all the congregation, the sons of Israel, may obey him. Moreover, he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. At his command they shall go out, at his command they shall come in, both he and the sons of Israel with him, even all the congregation. So Moses did just as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua, set him before Eleazar the priest, and before all the congregation. He laid his hands on him, commissioned him, just as the Lord had spoken through Moses. Moses says, God, I'm getting old. You told me I can't go in the land. Put somebody in charge in my place. And God said, commission Joshua. And do it this way. Take him to Eleazar the priest. Aaron had already died. His son Eleazar was now the high priest. And with you and the high priest, commission him before all of Israel so they know I have picked Joshua. And Eleazar will inquire for him with the Urim. How many of you know what the Urim and the Thummim are? Got one hand that raised up. Got two hands. Okay, good, thank you. I had a Old Testament symposium class in college. We were getting a bunch of subjects to pick from. I picked the Urim and the Thummim. We had to write a 10-page paper on the subject we picked, copy it, pass it out to everybody, and make an oral report. I don't know why, but I happened to pick the Urim and the Thummim. It looked good to me. I researched. I studied. I went to every encyclopedia there was. I even went to the Catholic and the Jewish encyclopedias. With wide margins, triple space, and a lot of shooting the bull, I got 7 pages, actually 6.5 pages. There's nothing said about it. There are 2 stones, we think, stones, that were kept in pockets on the breastplate of the high priest. And using those, he could ascertain God's will. How, we do not know. There's nothing ever said about it. But the high priest had them, and with those, he could determine God's will. So we could ask the high priest, God would somehow answer using those stones, and thus we'd know God's will. So that's what it means that he would inquire for God by the Urim. So Moses is there, or ask of God, who's going to take my place? And God says, pick Moses. Chapter 32 of Numbers, verses 20 to 32. He is commanded by Moses about the 2.5 tribes who wanted to stay on the east side of Jordan. When Israel makes their final push toward the land of Canaan at the end of their wanderings, they come to Edom and they say, we want to pass through on the King's Highway. The King's Highway goes from Damascus, if you got your little Bible map, all the way down to Ezion-Geber. The Sinai Peninsula forks, and I'll do it backwards for you. The western fork is the Red Sea, goes up towards Egypt. The eastern fork is the Gulf of Aqaba, and it kind of angles up towards Damascus. So the King's Highway goes from Damascus all the way down on the east side of the Jordan River through Amman, today's Amman, New Testament Philadelphia, Old Testament Rabbath-Ammon, by Mount Nebo, down to Ezion-Geber, which is that little point there. Moses said, we want to go through on the King's Highway. We'll not get off the road. We're not going to drink any of your water. We're not going to bother any of your fields. And Edom said, no way. So they had to actually go around Edom and come back up. When they get there, they tell the people on that side, Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, we're just going to camp here a little while. We ain't going to bother nobody. We're here in peace. And Sihon says, oh no, and he attacks. Well, you got to defend yourself. And so Joshua leads Israel's army and attacks back or retaliates, and they conquer the eastern side of the Jordan. Now, God told Abraham he would have the land of Canaan. He did not tell him you're going to get the other side of the Jordan River. But because they conquered those people, because they were attacked, half a tribe of Manasseh, all of one, Manasseh had 2 sons, and Machir, if I got it right, said, we're going to settle over here. The other half settled on the other side. And the tribe of Gad and the tribe of Reuben said, we kind of like it over here. We're going to stay here. And Moses says, okay, that's not a bad idea, but you will have to go and cross the river, your army, your fighting men, and help them conquer their country because they helped you conquer yours. Turnabout's fair play. And they said, we'll do that. And so they built some cities to leave their families in. They left their shepherds, take care of their flocks. They didn't settle it yet. They just left it open. And then they went across the river with Joshua and the rest of Israel and helped conquer the country. But here in Numbers 32, Moses commands Joshua to be sure that those 2.5 tribes, their armies, go with him to conquer the country. Deuteronomy. We're getting close. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 3. Moses says to Israel, verse 3, "It is the Lord your God who will cross ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you. You shall dispossess them. Joshua is the one who will cross ahead of you, just as the Lord has spoken." Moses here gives his final charge. Verse 7, "Moses then calls to Joshua and said to him, In the sight of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you shall go with this people into the land which the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall give it to them as an inheritance. The Lord is the one who goes ahead of you. He will be with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed." Moses writes this in a book and gives the book to Joshua. Then later, Joshua is called by God to the tent, that tent of meeting, and there God commissions Joshua to lead Israel into the country. Verse 9 of chapter 34, he's accepted as the leader of Israel. I got to hurry because I got some other things I want to say about here. Joshua chapter 1. You wonder when did we ever get there? Here we are. Joshua 1. It came about after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' servant, saying, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, cross this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, to the sons of Israel. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads, I have given it to you, just as I spoke to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, as far as the great sea toward the setting of the sun, will be your territory. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth. You shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." God says, now Joshua, Moses is dead, as if Moses didn't know. You back up to chapter 34, Moses goes to Mount Nebo, he dies, God buries the body, we don't know where. Israel mourns for Moses for 30 days. At the end of that 30 days, God said, all right, Moses, or Joshua, Moses is dead. Get up, take Israel across this Jordan. I will be with you. Be strong and courageous. Keep the book of the law. Joshua, it's time. It's time. Moses is dead. It's time for you to take the leadership. It's time for you to take over. God told Abraham, leave his family, his homeland, his country, Ur of the Chaldees. Go to the land that I will show you. And when it gets to Canaan, God says, all right, Abraham, this is the land. Walk all over it. It's yours. I have given it to you. That promise is made to Isaac and then to Jacob. And from Jacob to the boys. They go to Egypt. And God promised to Abraham, you keep this point in mind, God told Abraham, I will give you this land, but it's going to be a while. 430 years. Because the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet full. God gave the people of Canaan 400 years to repent and return to God. You say, well, who was telling him to do that? Well, there was Job. He fits in that time frame. Balaam was a prophet of God. Abimelech, the king of Gerar, was a worshiper of God. Melchizedek was to preach to the Most High God, Genesis 14, in Jerusalem. And I'm thinking there were probably others. God just doesn't condemn a people without giving them opportunity, and unless they know the opportunity's there, they won't take it. Like Paul says, and like Isaiah said, how shall they know unless there's a preacher? And how shall they preach unless they be sent? So God sent messengers to them. We just don't know who they were. But God gave them a chance to change. In the meantime, God said, your descendants will be in a foreign land, but I will bring them out with a mighty hand. The reason for that is Egypt was an up-and-coming world power. They needed to be judged as well. And so he sent Israel to Egypt, then they were enslaved, and then God brought them out, and the 10 plagues was a judgment on Egypt. By the way, the people who lived in the land of Canaan knew what was going on in Egypt. They knew about the 10 plagues. We'll find later that Rahab said, we know what your God did to Egypt, and that was 40 years ago. We know what happened. We know who your God is. We know what he has done. We're just not willing to change and repent. That's the problem. We're not willing to change and repent. So God said, Moses, take Israel across, or Joshua, take Israel across the Jordan. I will be with you. Now, how many times does God tell him, be strong and courageous? And then take this book of the law. All right, here's some lessons. Number one, whatever we do, be strong and courageous. The Lord is with you. If you will study your New Testament, you will find that God says through Paul more than once, Jesus says it himself more than once, God is with you. The Spirit is dwelling in you. God's with you. My God is bigger than the problems. David said to Goliath, you defy Israel's army, you also defy my God. My God's bigger than you. Joshua said, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Hivites, Hittites, Amorites, all you parasites that live in the land of Canaan, my God's bigger than your God. My God is with me and with this army of Israel. So be strong and courageous. Don't worry about it. Next, Moses is dead. We mourn over those who've passed away. And we must take the time to grieve. Do that. But then leave the past and go forward. So many times we think, brother so-and-so, yeah, he's gone. But we want to hang on to that person of the past, that teacher of the past, that influence of the past. Mourn the fact that they're not with us anymore, however that is, whether they moved to another country or another state or wherever. But mourn that. Get over it. And live, go forward. Moses, he's not here anymore, Joshua. We can't sit here at Beth Peor. The land is over there. Go. I'm with you. This book of the law, it needs to be in your mouth. Meditate on it. It needs to be in your heart. Be careful to do. Obey it in your actions. Now, if you look at that carefully, God says, Joshua, this book of the law, not just the 10 Commandments, but the whole law, everything involved in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, all of this needs to be in your mouth. Now, it's not going to be in your mouth unless it's first in your heart. So how do we get it into our hearts? Well, the eyeball, the brain, is the avenue for it to go in. Read the Word of God. Study the Word of God. The psalmist said, how I love thy law. I meditate on it day and night. That's what God said to Joshua. Have it in your heart. Meditate on it day and night. There are a number of things we can use as distractions. to take us away from the truth. You see these people who are extremely skinny, and you say, they don't eat a whole lot, or don't stay with them. You see people on the other end of the spectrum, you say they eat a whole lot, or they have a physical ailment that's causing that. And I've seen some people that you go to the buffet, and they come out with a plate that's just heaped over. I'm thinking, I can't eat all that in a day, much less at one meal. And they go back for another plate, heaped over like that. If it's going in here, it's settling somewhere else, right? We do that physically. We'll understand that physically. We'll understand someone who is sickly, that there's a diet that they need to get on or get off. We understand the food intake, the drink intake, and that importance to our physical health. And we go to the medicine cabinet, and it's full of all these pills that we need to take to maintain our physical health. But what about our spiritual health? Are we spiritually full? Are we spiritually eating? Meditate on God's Word. Put it in your heart, and then it will come out of your mouth. But you got to put it in the heart first. So, take this book of the law, put it in your mouth, in your heart, and in your actions. Be careful to obey. Now, when I wrote this last night, I happened to think, you know what? That is our mission statement. You see on the wall over there? That's our mission statement. Living for Him, speaking about Him, serving in His name. It's all right there. Now, I didn't plan that. It happened that way, okay? Any of these passages you want to go back and study, I put all of them in the Bible app. There's a couple of questions there. You can follow along too. If you need help getting into that, just let me know, and I'll help you find that. It's not that hard to work with. There's also room for you to take notes, answer some of the questions. And if you fail to grasp something or slip through part of it, it's all there. You can go back and get it. Today is the first Sunday of the month, and it's the day that we take up our collection for the City of Children, for Mia and Angel, that we support there and care for them. I know a couple of weeks ago, Tim talked about some other children that need support, but this class supports those too. And so today's day we take up that collection. If you don't have anything put in, I've got an envelope that I can take your money and put in an envelope and designate it for City of Children so it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. Let's leave today living for Him, speaking about Him, and serving in His name. God bless you. Have a great week. We're dismissed.